back to our Episcopal Church Foundation series of various webinars. It's wonderful for you to be with us here today, and welcome. Today's webinar topic will focus on major donors for dioceses, a crucially important subject for people who work for dioceses and, for that matter, many parishes. For those of you who are not with a diocese and with a parish, you're also very welcome to join us if you can. If you have not already, please do type in the name of your diocese or parish, your position at the parish, and if you have any particular questions for us, we would love to try and answer those today. What I'd like to do for a moment, I'll give you an introduction to ECF in a moment. But let me turn the floor over to Terry Mathis, who's going to be your webinar leader today. Terry Mathis is Program Director in charge of capital campaigns in our Diocesan Solutions for the Episcopal Church Foundation. She has tremendous experience in the area of fundraising, both for not-for-profits as well as parishes and dioceses throughout the country. So, Terry, why don't you give us a quick overview of our webinar today, and then I'll give a brief introduction about ECF.
Terrific. Thank you, Jim. What you will see on the screen here is just a quick sort of bullet points of what we will cover. ECF's mission, because a lot of you have some experience with ECF. We can do this quickly, but ECF covers far more ground than most people tend to realize. And Jim's going to walk you through that territory. We'll start with identifying and cultivating your donors, talking about how to find them and how to prepare them to make major gifts, and how to prepare you to make those major gift asks. We'll talk about how to know if you're ready, or how to know if the donor is ready to make that ask, and then literally walk you through how to make an ask. Along the way, we will cover the importance of the bishop's role, and then what your actual donors have to. In preparation for this webinar, we asked the bishops around the country to give us just the email address of significant donors or major donor prospects, sent them a short survey, and some of the responses to that survey will be used in the webinar. Now, as we've mentioned, if you have questions, feel free to type them in the chat. Leslie Pendleton, whom you saw if you logged on early, is monitoring that and will pass those questions along to me if I'm not able to address them during the webinar. I absolutely will follow up with you by email, so keep the faith. We will be in touch. Jim, could you walk us through ECF's mission?
Very, very briefly, my name is Jim Murphy. I'm the Managing Program Director at the Episcopal Church Foundation. I focus in on the area of financial resource development. The mission of ECF is to empower congregations, and we do that in two primary ways. But first, what ECF is, because many people may not know, is we are an independent and lay-led organization, which is quite rare within the Episcopal Church, but we seek resources and best practices with people throughout the church in dioceses, parishes, and Episcopal organizations to help you do the work that God has called you to do in your own particular circumstances. We do that, as I said, in two primary ways. First, in leadership resource development. Many of you are aware of our various workshops and webinars like this we do throughout the country or online, as well as the Vestry Resource Guide, Funding Future Ministry, and other publications, in addition to our fantastic resource website called ECFVP.org, and we'll be sending a link to that site to everyone who attended today. In addition to that, the Episcopal Church Foundation focuses on empowering mission and ministry in the church through its various financial resource development. We can help dioceses and parishes in their annual giving and annual stewardship needs, as well as we have a wonderful capital campaign program where we can assist parishes and dioceses across the country through our geographically dispersed group of consultants, and we can assist you on a sliding fee scale so that everyone can afford that level of professional expertise. Finally, we're the main resource in the entire church, and we are happy to share all of our resources with you. And finally, we have an endowment management area where we can help you to shore up that sense of confidence and trust among the members of your congregation by putting in place endowment and gift acceptance policies to help enhance that. We can also help you invest those funds if you need them, but bottom line, we are here in a very unique way to help the Episcopal Church and its leadership do what you've been called. So without further ado, I would like to take care.
Thank you, Jim. I've sent a message to our tech support to ask her to start muting microphones, but you can get there ahead of her if you were just now arriving. If you would mute the microphone on your computer, and if you are on a phone, just hit that mute button on the phone so that you have the luxury of answering the doorbell, taking a sip of coffee, and we don't get the background noise. Now, before we get started, I'm going to take the first of those polls that I mentioned. Leslie's going to post that up for you here. It will be helpful just to kind of define the universe for you to click on this poll. I want to reassure you that the results of the poll come in the aggregate. I will not see who asked for what size gift. I will see that one or two people, for instance, right now, 2 people have asked for less than $10,000 is the largest gift they've ever asked for. 2 people have asked for somewhere between $10,000 and $100,000. One person has asked for between $500,000 and $1 million. That's as you answer, the poll is updating this, and it looks like we've got one person who has asked for over $1 million, and 2 people have asked for between $500,000 and $1 million. The majority of people responding sort of fall in the 5, 6, and 7. There's another person who's coming in the 6-figure range. Quite a few of you have asked for between $100,000 and $500,000, about 5. Another 7 have been asked for something between $10,000 and $100,000. So all of you are out there trying, and that is excellent. A major gift is major to the donor, as no matter what the size. So a $10,000 gift may be quite large to someone of smaller means than someone who's able to give $1 million gift, and we will talk about the importance of that. Leslie, if you could clear that poll, let's see. The next one is, how large a gift have you ever received? Because one of the things we'll talk about is the amount to ask for versus what you may actually get. So if you can check that poll, I'm watching the aggregate add up. Somehow, this one's been a little condensed. Let me see if I can enlarge it a little bit, get the numbers. Oh, bravo. 4 people have received a gift of $1 million or more. So we've got some background. Julie, you could help us with that. Since only 2 people said they had asked for it, I wonder if that implies that 2 people or 2 institutions received $1 million gifts they didn't ask for. That's really impressive. So here's how you stack up. 13 people have received gifts of less than $10,000. 10 people have received gifts between $10,000 and $100,000. 3 people have received gifts of $100,000 to $500,000. 2 logging in at $500,000 to $1 million, and then 5 now at $1 million or more. Interesting. I'd be interested to know how many of those $1 million gifts were estate gifts as well. Leslie, thanks so much. If you will close that poll, What I'm going to do now is race through a ton of statistics. Don't make yourself crazy trying to write all these numbers down, because if you haven't received the PDF of this presentation in advance, you certainly will. As a follow-up, you'll get these numbers. Don't try to write them all down. I'm just defining the universe. The first thing I want you to see, all the numbers that we will talk about today are courtesy of Giving USA, which is a study conducted by the Center on Philanthropy by the University of Indiana, in Indianapolis, or a Bank of America study of high net worth donors. So those are the two main sources for statistics in this presentation, so we don't have to source every slide. What you'll see here is actually good news for churches. The overwhelming majority of charitable donations in a given year come from individuals. This is good news for you because you are not likely to get any corporate sponsorships for your parish or diocese. The other good news that isn't singled out here is that about half of that nearly $218 billion you're seeing there comes from the top 3% of donors. In other words, your major donor prospects. Now, where your donors give, this looks like good news as well. 32% of giving goes to religious organizations. There's also some important backstory here. In the mid-70s, that percentage was 45. So over the years, the religious giving sector has been losing market share, so to speak, at the rate of 1 to 3 percentage points a year. That giving has been taken up, as you will see, by what are classified as public society benefits, like Save the Children, for instance, foreign aid, that would be Oxfam or care.org, and health. On the plus side, these are organizations that are actually doing some of the things that as Christians we say is our mandate to do. Care for the sick, lift up the poor, that sort of thing. On the downside, the number of these organizations has absolutely skyrocketed. There's been a 33% increase in the last 10 years alone, and just the extra amount of what we call message noise makes it harder for your message to be heard. And this is just one of the things that makes fundraising for dioceses and diocesan institutions particularly challenging. The good news is there are some things that you can do about that. And in fact, your donors have mentioned it as well. Before we get to that, though, why are people giving? There has been a tectonic shift in philanthropy in the last decade or so as baby boomers have come of age as leaders and philanthropic leaders. They have brought a cultural shift that has filtered down, if you will, to the Gen X's and the millennials. This is important for two reasons. One is that the last of what we call the traditionalists, those born before 1946, the last of the traditionalists turned 65 in 2010. And while people have longer life expectancies and we expect to have these people with us for a very long time, they're looking at fixed incomes, health issues, retirement. Their language is going to be on the wane, whereas what we call the new philanthropists, people who were born 1946 or later, are beginning to shape how giving is discussed, how it's quantified, and what is motivated. Now, these are really sweeping generalizations that you see on these two slides. And we have one of our consultants, Erin Weber-Johnson, is a walking encyclopedia on these smaller cohorts within these two larger areas. But what I want you to look at for now is how much language on the left sounds pretty much like the average church stewardship language, giving out of God's abundance to you, which has a subtle implication of duty. God gave this to you, so you owe something back. We even talk about our planned giving societies as leaving a legacy and being a legacy society. And then I want you to look at how much the language on the right reflects the language of those organizations that I just mentioned, Oxfam, care.org. And I'm going to come back to that in specific detail later. But as I said, I'm zooming through right now. Remember I said, I did not say this when I zoomed through too fast, that 65% of high net worth donors say that they give to religion. Here you have even better news. 36% of their largest gift went to religion. Education comes in a solid second with 25%, and after that you drop off into single digits. There is other data that suggests a lot of the mega gifts that we hear about tend to go to education and to healthcare, and I'll unpack that for you as we go as well. Right now, this is where newcomers to major gift work get their biggest surprise. The largest gifts by high net worth individuals actually aren't that big. Most of them, as you can see, fall in the $2,000 to $5,000 range or under $2,000. Now, overwhelmingly, these gifts are for annual support. When you think about it that way, you look at that $2,000 to $5,000 slice, does that start to look like somebody's pledging history? These people are not being stingy. They're widely committed. As a general rule, high net worth donors tend to be committed to as many as 15 philanthropic groups in a given year. So part of what you're going to have to do is differentiate yourself from that large group. Also notice there's a very worthwhile percentage here for six-figure donors. You've got 5% who have given $100,000 or more. Now that's an A. You can do that. But what you know is that earning an A takes a lot of work and persistence. So that's what we're going to talk about. And luckily, there's some things that you've got in your favor. Look what motivates your donors. 70% say that their giving is motivated by their personal values. And wouldn't it be nice to think that their personal values are shaped by their religious experience? If they're already involved in the Episcopal Church, the odds are really pretty good that you've got a significant piece of their personal values as part of what makes them feel connected to you. Notice the uncomfortable correlation here between faith and obligation. I anecdotally am inclined to think that this reflects that shift that we were talking about earlier. As long as your language of faith is reflecting the language of obligation rather than the language of impact and change, you're going to be addressing only about half of your market here. Moving on, external motivations. Fortunately, the donors are very clear about how they want you to talk to them. They want to know what impact their gift is going to have. And I'm going to show you specifically how to do that in a few minutes, but first take a look at some of the other things. Financial security, there's not a lot you can do about this. When the economy is bad, people tend to tighten their purse strings. That's a known thing. But I want you to notice, given in the past, these are people who say, well, I give to this organization because I gave to them before. There's an old aphorism in fundraising, your best donors are your current donors. What that means is if you don't have an annual fund or a giving mechanism of some kind, you're going to have to basically get in line, and we'll talk about ways to do that. The other thing I want you to notice is the organization's efficiency. This is key because the number one reason donors gave for ending support of an organization was the sense that their money wasn't being used well. Now, I said I was going to talk to you about how to communicate impact. I was on a long business trip several years ago, and I decided to sort of make a game of taking a poll of all the airport ads that I saw that addressed causes that the church sort of supports. I guess that we have a biblical mandate to do: feeding the poor, feeding the hungry, lifting up the poor, caring for the sick, those sorts of things. So this is what my little business trip poll looked like. Make-A-Wish foundation was targeted very specifically at me. There was a businesswoman with a briefcase, and the ad said, "My miles have the power to grant a wish." Make-A-Wish serves terminally ill children. They're in airports because they want you to give your miles. So it was a really well-targeted ad. It falls under the public society heading of those organizations that have increased. 3% increase in giving over the last 10 years. Not huge, you would think. Next was care.org. The ad said, she can plant the seeds to change her world if she can get the seeds. Care.org falls under the international aid category that I mentioned to you. It's one of the fastest growing. In the past 10 years, giving has been up almost 7%. Nothing but Nets. Their message is drumbeat consistent. You should do as well. They say Nets save lives. That's all they do. Giving to health organizations has increased 4.6% in the last year. And if you add up those three sectors, you can see where that 15% market share that religious giving has lost may have gone. What I found so fascinating about this airport game was look at the verbs these organizations were using. Remember grammar school verbs are the action words? Have the power, change the world, save a life. There are even verbs implicit in the noun in these slogans. They offer the thing that donors say they're looking for the most, which is impact. Remember that 75% give because of impact? My favorite example of this is Heifer International, where they tell you, now this is one of those times they said, raise your hand, go up to that icon, raise your hand if you know what Heifer International is. Whoa, look at all those hands going up. Yes, yes, there you go. Heifer International tells you that $500 will buy a cow, and this is how that cow will change the economy of a village. This is what we call quantified impact. It makes it easy for the donor to understand the difference that the gift will make. Okay, somebody can clear the hands down. That would be terrific. Thank you. But you know what? You don't have to take my word for it. Remember I told you we surveyed your own donors? Here's what they had to say. I believe strongly in the mission the gift financed and its potential to provide long-term benefits to the diocese and the community. Notice belief and that forward potential and long-term benefits to the community. Another donor said, we wish to help the institution be a better place, that desire to change things. And the most important part of our gift was the direct impact. Now this is a sampling, but I didn't cherry pick. I didn't just choose, the best ones. Overwhelmingly, they said that they wanted the opportunity to change the world and to make things better, to improve them. Now, I told you I was going to race through a ton of data at the beginning. So I'm going to stop for a minute, give you a breather. Did we have any questions show up in the chat? Leslie was monitoring that. We have no questions? Okay, we've got a question that says, what do I mean when I said there are verbs implied in the noun? Okay, this was not meant to be a copywriting seminar, but notice the word power can be a verb, but in this case it is used as a noun, the power. Life, in this case, is a noun, but live is also a verb. That's what I mean by the verbs being implied in the noun. And that's actually a really good thing to bear in mind, because when I start talking about quantifying your impact, the use of good verbs will make that, it implies what it is that you do. Verbs tell what you do. Okay, now we're going to move on. There are not being any questions just yet, but if you do have questions, keep typing them in the chat. Leslie will get them to me. But first I'm going to distract Leslie and ask her to post another poll. We're going to move on to where to find your donors. And remember I said that your best donors are your current donors. So one of the best ways to start identifying donors is to have some kind of direct mail appeal. And Leslie, if you can enlarge that poll a little bit, I can't see all the responses. So if you can make that a little bit larger. There we go. Great. A lot of you do have annual appeals. That's wonderful. I'm seeing 19 now, up to 20 who have a direct mail appeal. 13, a little more than half of you follow that up with email. I'm assuming that's a follow-up, not just substituting email for direct mail. 11 of you, which is a good 40%, oh more, 12 of you have gatherings with your donors, and this is key. We'll talk about that a lot. Personal visits right there in the same area. Are you guys double counting? Are you counting those gatherings with donors as personal visits? I mean one-on-one visits there. If you don't, a lot of you, almost as many as have direct mail appeals, have special appeals. If you don't have an annual fund, something that supports your annual operating budget, often the best way to get people started is with a direct appeal. And then 4 of you have no annual giving program. That's okay. We're going to show you how to get that going and how to find major donors when you don't have an annual giving program. So Leslie, if you could clear that for me, please. We will move on to the next slide. So you all are starting ahead of the game. That's, those of you who already have an annual fund, you want to be using it to spread your vision. Not just ask for the money. You want to communicate what it is that you do in this little corner of God's kingdom that has an impact. So what are your stories of impact? Just like Jesus wrapped up theological truths in neat stories that people could remember and carry with them, that's what you're going to do with your vision here. Is there a congregation that has benefited from diocesan involvement in some way? I was working with the diocese for over a year before I discovered that they were making nearly $750,000 in vitality grants every year. Those were wonderful stories. So we started talking about the congregations that had benefited from those grants. The other end of that, and you run into this very often with a diocese, is that people are not clear what a diocese does. I had one donor early on come to a gathering for informational purposes, and he sent in a critique afterward, which was really helpful. He said, I do not know what the core mission of the diocese is other than to oversee all of the churches in the diocese and to train new clergy members, from what I could tell from Thursday's explanation. That was the night when he went to the event. This means, this is key people, this means I see no case for investment. Now, this person attended a parish that had received 2 grants from the diocese. But at the time, no one talked about how those particular grants had changed the life of his parish. But when I told those stories to another parish, which has received no grant, everyone in the room became very animated and had their own stories to tell. So really a lot of it is telling those stories of impact because people can latch onto that. They understand the difference that you have made. You want to use your annual fund to build relationships, and we'll talk about specific ways to do that in a little while, but basically what that means, as I was teasing you earlier, is you want to build relationships with people. You want to identify people who are consistently supporting you and get to know them. Visit them one-on-one, which, as they get to know you, will have the added benefit of they will bring their friends, which is part of how you will identify those new donors. If you're starting from scratch, as I mentioned before, special appeals are a great place to do this. I think of them as the gateway drug to giving because they identify people who are willing to give and with whom your mission somehow resonates. If you've got diocesan institutions such as a camp and conference center, Episcopal charities, a diocesan office will do well to be involved with those institutions because typically that's where people who are involved beyond the parish walls will look first. Those institutions tend to have better impact stories than diocesan offices have, or they're better at communicating them. It's hard to actually say for sure. And then I would encourage your staff and your rectors to keep a running list of people with strong skill. They won't necessarily be high capacity people, but they may be, and they are certainly high interest people. If you've been there on site with a parish to do a transition meeting, there's nothing like having a note from the bishop that comes back and says, dear, Jane, Canon Transition says that you have developed an excellent process at St. Swithin's. Thank you for all your hard work and support. I hope we can meet soon and you can share the good work that you've done with others. That sort of thing. Similarly, before your bishop goes on visitation, the office should be contacting the rector and saying, who's doing something really good? Who should the bishop give a shout out to? Who should the bishop get to know? Rectors would love to hear their bishop praising their parishioners for the good work that they do. I see there's a question over here on the side, Leslie, but it's a little bit hidden. So while I'm addressing ministry days, maybe we can move that out so where I can see it. Ministry days and workshops are a little bit of a mixed bag in that they tend to attract what are sometimes called church groupies, people who do a lot of church work but are not necessarily focused or strong leaders. This is where they come to get their sense of belonging. But it's worth keeping a running list there because these are people who you have identified as having an affinity for your cause. And one of the things you will see is that no matter how much capacity they have, if they don't have affinity and interest, they're not going to give. Okay, Patricia wants to know if social media is affecting religious giving. Yes and no, Patricia. It is affecting how people give. If you don't have electronic giving, if you don't have a link on your Facebook page to your giving button on your website, you are losing entry-level donors. On the other hand, there's a little bit of a myth that you can raise massive sums of money on the internet. And I am here to tell you that the entire Episcopal Church, working together across the internet with some very intentional personal one-on-one coaching and training, was able to raise about $3 million for the Episcopal Church in Haiti. Now, $3 million is a lot of money, but there were some significant major gifts involved there, and it was the entire Episcopal Church. Your diocese will not raise huge sums of money by posting a give button on Facebook. It needs to be used in concert with a very personal approach, and I'm going to talk about those personal approaches in a bit. I want to talk first, though, about going back to people who want to know what to do if you're starting from scratch. Take a little tour through what we call wealth scans. There are a variety of prospect research firms out there, Wealth Engine, DonorScape, Blackbaud. These are not a bad place to start if you've got nothing to work with. You can use these for what I call a fishing expedition and put your entire database through a scan, and they will rate everybody by their wealth capacity. Now, you will end up with what we call a lot of false positives, someone who has a common last name, someone who has the same name as a major donor somewhere else. My 30-year-old tech support guy was rated as a $5 million prospect because he had the same name as someone who had made many, many major gifts to the University of Mississippi. I'm sure he would have loved to know that he had that kind of wealth. But it's not a bad place to start. You take that list, then sit down with your rectors and say, are these people really high-capacity people, or should we work on more research? Should we work on getting to know them? Now, why would your rector want to give you that information? If you start early enough, one of the things I recommend doing is being upfront with your rectors and saying, we're going to pay for this service. If you will give us an updated list of your people, we will share that information with you. And in diocesan campaigns where I have done that, it's interesting the number of rectors who never follow through and ask for the information afterward. We say, it's back, we'll sit down with you and explain it to you. But the ones who have uncovered maybe just one or two, but one or two people that they hadn't realized had more capacity, and they could involve them more. And once you involve them, they will become better donors, and that is key. There is a one-to-one correspondence between the number of hours a person volunteers and participates in an organization's mission and the amount that they give. So you want to begin involving these people as you meet them. But even before you go to them and say, I want you to participate in this or that way, I want you to know more about what we're doing, I want you to consider joining the board or the trustees, you need to clarify your mission. You need to be very, very clear before you start what it is you're asking them to participate in. Remember that donor who said, I don't know what your mission is. Take a lesson from those nonprofits that I just ran by you. Put your mission in simple, clear verbs. And that will come in handy when you start looking for those stories of impact, because you'll be able to talk about what it is you are doing. You are saving lives. You are granting wishes. Whatever it is that you count as your mission. Then develop measurable goals. This is the heifer factor that I was talking about. You want to quantify what an investment in your organization will do. Camps are great at this. They'll say, fund a camper. It costs X amount to send a camper to summer camp, and you can go fishing for gifts in that range. Major donors are not immune to this either. You just need larger, quantifiable goals. And then, as I said, collect those stories of impact. You want to show the difference that those quantifiable goals will make. So for instance, let's say your goal is to have debt-free seminarians. You want to support your seminarians to the extent that they can emerge from seminary with no debt. Then your impact story would be potentially either a seminarian who had to leave your diocese for a better paying job in order to pay off the debt that you're trying to eradicate, or on the other end of that spectrum, if you were able to provide that level of support, here's a seminarian that came back and is now reinvigorating a small struggling parish with the new ideas that she picked up in seminary. That's what I mean by collecting stories of impact. And then the participation. This is huge. As I said, the overwhelming majority of donors give the largest gift to the place where they have logged the most volunteer hours or served in an oversight capacity, such as the board. Now, for a number of reasons that we'll talk about moving forward, involving your major donors in a meaningful way is sometimes the biggest challenge for a diocese. So let's talk about how you do that. First of all, you need to get to know these people. You need actual names, you need to sit down with them one-on-one, and you need to start by listening. Over 70% of major donor prospects have a strategy for giving, and about 60% of them have a budget. So you want to learn, what is their strategy? How does your mission align with that strategy? Do they have a budget? You want to get a feel for where you rank as a budgetary priority. Remember I said you may have to wait in line. Is there anything else I want to tell you? I'm trying to keep you on six-part schedule here, so I'm going to keep moving, although I had some good anecdotes about times when donors have changed their gift upward as the mission aligned with their own priorities and strategy. But let's keep you on target. You want to get to know those donors, and you're still kind of trying to get your hands around who might be your major donors. Do not overlook the effectiveness of that quick 1-hour power breakfast in the morning. These are busy people. Catch them before work. Tell them what's going on in your mission and ministry. Talent luncheons do the same thing. If you don't have some kind of counsel of advice, take a lesson from your alma mater, camps and conference centers. These are places where people come and visit and hear about the new plans for a particular organization. You might get good input from them at that point, but the chief reason for those meetings is for you to put your vision in front of people and allow them to sort of play and interact with it, because that builds investment. The diocesan council or trustees, your endowment boards, these are places that are sorely in need of high capacity, highly sophisticated, financially sophisticated people. These are a little bit harder because in many dioceses there are complicated election modules for how people are put on these boards. So you will have to know your donors pretty well in order to ask them to stand for election to council or for an endowment board. In some cases, prospect research will tell you where donors have given elsewhere and give you a sense of what their strategies and their focuses might be. Now I'm seeing a ton of questions over here. Cheryl, the question of giving to the diocese versus the parish. I will get to that as we move along. That is a good one. In fact, I will answer these questions while you all take the next poll. Leslie's going to pull up a poll about where you use your high capacity donors. Do you know if you've got high capacity people on your fiscal board, on your governing board? Yes, no, don't know. So while that's happening, Cheryl, I'd like to tell rectors that not in 30 years of being in and out of church fundraising, I have never heard someone say, Father, I can't give to the stewardship fund because I gave all my money to the diocese. Overwhelmingly, the loyalty is to the place where people spend Sunday in the pews. So much so that I have sat down with diocesan employees and said, tell me about your church. And they'll run on about the liturgy and the great singles group and their outreach programs and, you know, on and on and on. And I'll just let them run out of gas. And when they finally do, they will not have mentioned their bishop at all. So people think of church as the place they spend Sunday morning, and your real question is how can you get them to think in a larger term? You want to stay in really, really, really good communication with your rectors as you move along, because especially in places where they're feeling pinched, they will worry that you are taking resources from them. But in nearly every situation where I have handled a major gift for a diocese, that individual has also increased their giving to their parish because they've just gotten more involved in the Episcopal Church. Now I'm going to look at this poll that you all filled out. This is wonderful. 18, or about 75% of people have high capacity people on your fiscal board. Governing boards, it gets a lot tougher, doesn't it? A little bit more than half, 16 of you, and then about 5 people didn't know either way. So Leslie, if you'll clear that one. Okay, I see the person who says they want the anecdotes. I promise to send those by email. There's another question about how to collect stories of impact. I detect a communications officer here. While another place where you can often identify both a high level of commitment and a significant level of capacity is in your legacy society. So if your diocese does not have a legacy society, which is an organization that promotes and recognizes planned giving within the Episcopal Church, you're missing a huge opportunity. So those of you who answered you don't know or know, and actually, wow, nearly half, more than half, either don't have a legacy society or don't know. That's something to work on. You will want to check with Jim Murphy, our planned giving person, on how to get that going in your diocese. But these are people who are fiscally mindful enough to put the church in their will or other estate plans. So these are people that you want involved and have the potential to be major donor prospects. So Leslie, if you could clear that poll, let's see if we can keep everybody on schedule. Now, I told you you didn't have to write things down. Now you do. This is where you want to start taking notes. Major donor work is not just a matter of relationships, it's a matter of the calendar. Major gift officers in universities are assigned to between 50 and 100 major donor prospects, and it's part of their evaluation that they make X number of contacts with that person and X number of trips per year. They put it on the calendar. This is a calendaring activity. If that feels a lot of work, let me explain why it's done. You move a donor from just basic knowledge to knowledge and some interest to readiness to give. There's actually a tracking code that people use. Where I was trained, we just used ABC. So C was somebody who had affinity and capacity. That would be a high net worth Episcopalian. B had affinity, capacity, and some involvement. So that's a high net worth Episcopalian who has participated in a diocesan activity. Say they've gone on a trip to your companion diocese. And then an A level is somebody who we would consider close to ready to give. They've got all of the other criteria, plus they've expressed interest. Maybe they came to a prison ministry day and said, I want to be more involved. You need to start tracking your donors in this same way. And if that feels cold and calculating, then think about it as Henry Nouwen does. Raise your hand if you know Henry Nouwen, the author of The Wounded Healer, God's Beloved, The Life of the Beloved. Henry Nouwen actually wrote a book that you'll see here at the end, The Spirituality of Fundraising. He was an excellent fundraiser, and you want to think of your work with major donors as formation. They are dying to talk to you about money. They tell me this, they tell each other this, but they may not be telling you. Money is one of the most powerful and morally complex tools at our disposal, and yet Christians have gotten a little bit weird in terms of how we talk about money. So here are some of the things that your donors may say that lets you know they'd really actually like to have a conversation. I just gave X amount to the bishop's appeal. That's a person who wants to talk to you about their participation. Everybody just treats me like an ATM machine, or every time we come to church, it's about money. That person actually wants to talk to you about their giving. Once this gift is publicized, I'm going to have to get an unlisted number and turn on the alarm system. That's a person who wants to talk to you about money. Interestingly enough, every one of the donors who responded to that survey that I quoted to you said that they have they have conversations with their bishop or their rector about money, about giving. So having those conversations turns parishioners and Episcopalians into donors, and it's formation. We expect formation to take a long time with our priests, with our parishioners. It takes a long time with your donors as well. Plan on as many significant contacts as there are zeros in the ask. That means beforehand, you want to be talking about that project, visiting with them, taking them to see the results of that project 6 times before you ask them for $1 million. And then as follow-up, you want to be saying thank you as many times as you did before, as many times as you talked to them about the gift before you made the ask. The industry standard is 7 times, which sounds sort of biblical. Questions. We had some questions. What is the talent luncheon? Somebody asked. That's when you gather people by affinity. If you've got one of my diocesan clients, they were doing a debt reduction campaign, and it turned out we had all these bankers on the diocesan council and on the campaign committee. Wouldn't it have been great for the bishop to be having luncheon with those bankers every other month or so and talking about their mortgage situation before they entered the capital campaign, that sort of thing. Cynthia, yes, at least six significant contacts before you ask for $1 million. And we're going to talk about that a little bit in terms of making the ask. I'm really zooming now. Once you have identified your donor in terms of capacity and interest, you've involved them in your plans by making all those 6 visits and discussions. You've identified what they're interested in. That's how you identify the passions. And you've educated them about the difference that your plans will make. Don't tell them about college campus ministry program if what they're interested in is liturgy. Once you've identified what they're interested in and how that interest can make an impact on your mission, then you are ready to make the ask. This is a face-to-face visit. You need to bring the bishop in. If the bishop is not involved, we typically see that people come away with 50 to 75% less than if they send a layperson, a staff member, or a financial peer. And you want to focus on the donor, the project, and the impact, not the need. What we'd like to do is, let's see, I have an example. I've lost my place in my notes, trying to hurry you along here. I'm going to walk you through this in just a second. Critical components to actually making the ask are the donor's passion, the project's impact, and the specific way they can be involved. Oh, I stole this from one of your donors. I held back a quotation from the survey. The donor said, people give from the heart to God to change the world and grow the church in the process. So you've aligned your project with the donor's passion, and you're asking them to make a big impact. So let's just say you're asking them to fund a campus ministry program. Be ready to say what difference that's going to make. Putting a campus ministry program at EZU will provide college students the thoughtful response they need to questions of faith that are hallmarks of the Episcopal Church, and it will do this at the very point when young adults are forming habits that will stay with them into adulthood. That's the impact. Then you make a specific ask. We've calculated that the cost of a part-time missioner plus some program funding to be about $50,000 a year. I'd like to ask you to commit to $25,000 over a 3-year period that I can use as a challenge grant to raise more money to support this program. That's an ask. You just did it. The next thing you do, you say nothing. You be quiet and wait for the person to give you an answer. They've just had a lot to process, and in fairness, because we're weird about talking about money, the instinct is to talk people out of the gift. So be sure that you stay quiet until they have answered you. When you get that answer, what you want to be watching for is keeping the ball in your court, saying, let me follow up with you in 2 weeks, let me take this off your radar screen, that sort of thing. You want to confirm the gift in writing. I have seen $1 million gifts disappear when it was time to sign on the dotted line. So you don't get to count it until it's in writing. And then you say thank you. Remember I said you need to say thank you 7 times. Send photos of the progress, the impact, send updates on the new program or the construction. We just closed in the new education wing. It's going to be great this time next year. Send a quick email. You're not going to have that many people at this level. Say, I just came back from meeting with the new campus missioner, and she's got some great ideas about this. Stay in touch with people. This is the antidote to that donor who said, I feel like an ATM machine. Now, I told you about Henry Nallen's The Spirituality of Fundraising. My other frequently recommended book is called Not Your Parents' Offering Plate by Cliff Christopher. Both of these books are eminently readable and slim, so those of you who are diocesan staff and are on a time crunch, you can read them quickly. The Cliff Christopher book actually walks you through an ask like I did, but it's on paper, so you can do it at your own speed. I'm going to post my contact information for you here because I'm aware that we have zoomed through this really quickly, and many of you may want to send an email to ask follow-up questions. Or if you've just got questions that come to you later, we are happy to help. And just under the wire, I'm switching to the last slide, which shows you upcoming webinars that might be helpful to people at the diocesan level. If you've got more questions, I think we have a nanosecond for you to post them. And Jim Murphy is back to thank you for attending.
Absolutely, and we certainly just have about 3 more minutes to close up, but if anyone does have a last question, if you'd like to please type it in. Leslie can post that to Terry. Just in closing, again, thank you for coming. Terry, I do have one thing I just want to really underline of what you said, which is something that is not talked about when people talk about major gift fundraising. That is the spirituality which goes along with it. This is a tremendously important opportunity for someone to participate in the future mission and ministry of the diocese and be engaged in vision. And just because we're dealing with people who have great means, it does not mean that they don't feel deeply and spiritually about the things for which you're asking them to participate. So thank you, Terry, so much for bringing that up. Thank you for another fantastic job on this webinar that we've had here today. As Terry mentioned earlier, we have recorded this webinar. We will be sending a copy of the recording to everyone, as well as slides and some other resources. Speaking of webinars, there is one webinar currently scheduled, which is coming up in just a few weeks, which I'm very proud to say will be our first webinar in Spanish on the topic of stewardship. We've had other webinars in Spanish. This will be our first on stewardship. If you know of anyone who would benefit, especially those of you who are at the diocese who may have Spanish-speaking congregations, please do share this information with them so that they can join us on the 16th of May. Both Terry and I will be at the Episcopal Network for Stewardship Conference in Salt Lake City, Utah. Terry's going to have a great topic to talk about with, is your diocese ready for a capital campaign? I will be doing workshops on planned giving, on endowments, and there'll be some other wonderful workshops for you to participate in. So everyone who has signed up for this webinar, I see the question that's up, will be receiving notice of future webinars. So thank you all so much. This is an essential part of the ministry work that the Episcopal Church Foundation does in empowering leaders with best practices and guidelines. If there is anything we can do to assist your parish, or if you're from a parish or a diocese, please do let us know. We'd be more than happy to assist you and support you in that. So thank you, Leslie. Thank you, Julie, for your back office support of this. And especially thank you, Terry. You've done fantastic work throughout the country in the area of raising major gifts. And many people have already seen the Chicago story that was publicized over the weekend. So thank you for all of your good work in those efforts.
Thanks to all of you, and I will be in touch with extra questions that I wasn't able to address right here. If things come to you, by all means, shoot me an email. I'll be happy to answer your questions.
Travel safely, Terry.